sake.
I've leased at least eight cars in my lifetime.
I love that you have
I
leased
know.
before. So, hey, I am Hope from Handy GMC Buick Cadillac. I'm here with my friend Chris today. We are going to talk about the pros versus the cons of,
There aren't any cons really, but okay.
it's true, of leasing a vehicle versus buying it. So, a lot of people come in and they'll say, hey, I don't want to lease. Leasing's not for me. And so I think we need to really create a lot of clarity around what leasing is about.
Yeah.
Because I think people feel like they're in a box and they get stuck. They are limited to a certain amount of miles,
Right.
and so they feel they have more limitations. And the actual truth is that leasing gives you so much more freedom,
More options.
a lot more options.
Totally.
Because when you buy a vehicle, you are stuck in that box of you've purchased 100% of the value of the vehicle. And there is nothing that you can do except hope and pray that you can sell it and that you're not tipped.
You're taking all the risk.
Yeah,
You're taking all the risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
With a lease, I mean, you know how leasing works.
Yeah.
So
yeah, the manufacturer ends up, taking a lot of risk actually with the vehicle that you don't have to take.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about what leasing exactly is. First and foremost, you get a much smaller payment. And the reason that you get that smaller payment is because you are only making a payment based on the amount of that car that you're using. When
Right.
you buy, you're using 100%, but when you're leasing, the percentage is much smaller. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about that. If you look at a lease, you want to look at the car you truly want to buy. Look at the MSRP. And then there's what is called a residual value. And when you lease, you get that residual value. It's right on the contract. It's right up front. Matter of fact, it's a law that it's there. So you are only doing the difference between MSRP and the residual value, and that is the part that you are making a payment on.
So put it into numbers. So let's say you had a $20,000 car. The MSRP was $20,000, and your residual, let's say, is 11.
Right.
So you would be paying that other $9,000, and you'd be paying that over the 3 years. So that the residual is based on like what they think, what they hope the car will be worth, whether they sell it to somebody else or they bring it to the auction or whatever they do with the car. It's on the bank to make that other $11,000. So
Right.
that's how they're taking all the risk. So
Right.
yeah, and you only pay for I like to call it a stick of butter.
Mm-hmm.
Like if butter isn't that expensive that you don't have to worry about it. But if you're going to buy a half a stick of butter because you only needed half to make a cake, you got to think of your car that way. Like, so between mileage and age and, the condition of the car in general, it could be worth a lot of different things. There could be a residual value of, infinity. It could be worth half as much 3 years from now. It could be worth 75% as much. Depends on the car. Depends on a lot of things. But I like to think of it as that stick of butter. And, before you leave the dealership, when you drive home in your leased car, you're going to know what portion of that stick of butter you've actually agreed to pay for.
Right.
So
absolutely.
that's kind of cool.
And it gives you so many more options, I think, for ownership of a vehicle. A lot of
Right.
people feel like if they're leasing, they don't own it, but you actually have a lot more ownership. You have so many more options. So let's talk about some of those options. What happens when the lease is done? All right, you have the option of, number one, checking to see if you have equity. A lot of people believe that they do not or will not have any equity in a vehicle. Actually, they don't know that they can have equity in a vehicle.
They might. If it's worth $14,000
Right.
and the residual is 11 and you've only got maybe one more payment left, you might be able to trade that car in.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
use that equity. Yeah, you can.
Yeah, so that's an option. You actually could have equity in your vehicle. So pick something out that has a really good resale value. So here at GMC, we have a lot of options for that. So pick out something that has great resale value, and you may end up in a situation where you have a couple $1,000s to put into your next vehicle or next lease.
But to think of it another way, to put it on a different way, let's say your residual is 11,000. Let's say that car is actually the KBB or the Blue Book or whatever. The value might be only 9,000.
Right.
And then if you came in and your car was only worth 9,000 and you still owed more money on it, you'd be out $2,000 in that example. So it kind of protects you.
Well,
Like if the car isn't worth as much, not because you you drove too many miles or you did any damage. It's just that's the natural value of the car. It's only worth $9,000. At the end of 3 years, like, oh well, you're in a much better situation, because then it's up to the bank to try to get the $11,000 that they thought the car was worth. They're going to bring it to the auction themselves, and they're going to be out. They're not going to be able to do it. So you're actually you're up ahead that way.
Right.
Either way you look at it.
Yeah.
If it's worth more, great. You can use it for an equity, piece. Or if you're upside down on it a little bit, you hand it in and it's not your problem. So either way, you're really doing well. Like after the lease is up, you've got the option, depending on what the situation is,
Yeah, so Chris just talked about the number 2 option that you have, which is to hand your vehicle in, drop off the keys. So if you don't have any equity in your vehicle, it's no problem. It's then the manufacturer's problem, not yours.
Right.
And so that's really, really cool. What would be the third option for people outside of they can drop it off? They can certainly use it for equity for their next vehicle.
They can buy it.
You can buy it.
And they can drive it themselves.
And you can drive it yourself. So say you love your lease vehicle, you get an opportunity at that point in time to buy it. So there are more options for you as a lease person than ever there is in ownership. In ownership, you're in it. That's it.
One of the other ways I look at it, like I think this is really telling, is if, let's say you do a 7-year loan, you do 84 months on a loan, and whatever your payment is, that's your payment. That's the math. So let's say you're doing 12,000 miles a year. Well, I don't own anything if I lease. Well, guess what? You don't own anything for 7 years. So you go 7 years on a loan, and you've got 84,000 miles at the end of that, and then you get your title. Congratulations, you own an 84,000 mile car or truck or whatever, and it's 7 years old. It's out of warranty, and so what? Who cares? Nobody goes out of their way and says, "Wow, look at your 7-year-old 84,000 mile car."
Right.
If you look at it the other way, if you look at it on a lease, let's say you're doing a 3-year lease, at the 7-year mark, you would be on your third car, 1 year into your third car with, let's say 7 years ago, you didn't have stability control, or well, you did have stability control. You didn't have dynamic cruise control. You didn't have dynamic cruise control.
Right.
You didn't have all these other features, all these safety features that have just come out in the last couple of years. So you've got, every 3 years, you've got the latest and greatest, and not everybody needs all the bells and whistles, and you don't need all the toys and everything, but still, it's a lot safer car 7 years down the road to have a newer car, and you don't have to worry about the warranty issues and all that. You're under warranty the whole time.
Yeah.
It totally makes sense.
Yeah.
I leased a car one time, and a guy says to me, "Why would you ever buy anything that depreciates? Like, you buy your house, yeah, because it's probably going to be worth more down the road. You buy a Ferrari, maybe it's going to be worth more if it's a vintage car. Yeah, some cars, like a 66 whatever,
Right.
Camaro or something, that's going to be worth more money, maybe. But most of the time, cars that we drive,
They depreciate.
they're going to
Absolutely.
depreciate. So, you don't really want to put a lot of money into something that nobody goes to the bank and gives them $5,000 and says, "Hey, 3 years from now, I want my $2,000 back." If you put $5,000 in the bank, you're going to expect $5,000 back. That doesn't happen. You're not going to get your money back with the car. It's not an investment.
Absolutely. Yeah. So anyway, these were some really good points. I hope you guys got a lot out of this, and you were able to really kind of see some clarity around the difference between leasing versus buying.